Hello, in this video, I'm going to talk about the spinal cord. I'm going to focus specifically on the tracts of the spinal cord rather than gross anatomy. So the spinal cord includes gray matter and white matter. So the gray matter is this central portion that looks kind of like a butterfly, and the white matter is this outside portion, the superficial portion. So in the gray matter, we primarily have cell bodies and axons. That's what makes it gray. White matter is primarily white because it includes axons that are myelinated, which makes it have a whitish appearance. So where we have gray matter, it means that we have cell bodies more than anything that are causing the tissue to actually visually appear gray. So we have posterior or dorsal horns. That's this part here. There's a left and a right. And those mainly contain cells involved in sensory transmission. And then the ventral horns in the anterior portion over here contain alpha motor neuron cell bodies whose axons supply skeletal muscle fibers. Then we also have interneurons that are called Renshaw cells that are mostly located in the ventral horns. Okay, so in the anterior portion here. And we have many nerve fibers that descend from the brain that terminate on interneurons rather than on motor neurons. So the reason for that is it gives the interneurons the ability to kind of modulate the signals that are coming from the brain. So we have motor neurons that are originating in the brain and they're traveling down the spinal cord, and then they terminate on interneurons in the gray matter. And those interneurons can act to facilitate that signal, or it can inhibit that signal before it goes out to the motor neuron that then goes out to the effector. So it just kind of gives an extra layer of control that's more local than what is coming from the brain. Then we have white matter that is surrounding, and it contains sensory and motor tracts, which is what I'm going to discuss next. Okay, so the sensory pathways, those are the ascending tracts. So they're going from the periphery of the body and going up the spinal cord up to the brain. Those are the sensory pathways. So in this diagram here, what's indicated in red, those are the ascending tracts, and the green are the descending tracts or the motor pathways. So sensory pathways, sensory information is carried up through the spinal cord and brainstem to connect with different parts of the brain where we are processing that sensory information. So depending on the type of sensory information, it goes to all sorts of different parts of the brain, depending on what parts of the brain need that information to process and connect with motor commands and other things. Ascending tracts decussate, meaning that they cross over to the other side. So the ascending tracts decussate in the brainstem. So that means that the sensory information coming from one side of the body is received by the brain on the opposite side. On the dorsal column, that we have sensory information that's transmitting proprioception, touch, and pressure, goes up to the thalamus in the brainstem, and then from there it's sent out to the cerebral cortex, to the different areas that need that information. The anterolateral system transmits pain and temperature, plus some touch and pressure, and all of that information is going to the thalamus and then again being distributed to the different parts of the cerebral cortex as appropriate. Then we have spinocerebellar tracts that are transmitting proprioception information to the cerebellum. So that it's important, the cerebellum needs to receive information from the body about how we're moving in space so that the cerebellum can compare what is actually happening in the body against what the motor plan was coming from the cerebral cortex. So it's comparing the two so that it can detect the difference and send out corrections. Okay, then the motor pathways are the descending tracts. We have the pyramidal tract, also referred to as the corticospinal tract. It originates in different parts of the cerebral cortex, mostly the primary motor cortex, and projects to the spinal cord. Now, because it's coming from different parts of the cerebral cortex and converging, it forms sort of a pyramid shape, which is where it gets that name. Most of the fibers of this tract Decussate, again, meaning cross over to the opposite side. So they decussate at the medulla and travel down the lateral column of the spinal cord. And this tract is primarily involved in control of movements for fine motor skills. Then we have the extrapyramidal tracts, so the outside of the pyramidal tracts. So those are also referred to as brainstem pathways. They originate in the brainstem and project down the spinal cord. And most of these do not decussate. They stay on the same side. These are primarily involved in postural control and facilitation and inhibition of muscles in the hands and fingers. All right, thank you so much for watching. I'll see you in the next video.